The Arab slave trade. What this lesson will explain, not a lot of people know that Arabs were the first of the first to begin slavery in the New World. It was the passage from Old Earth rule, Hamite Ishmael, to New Earth rule, Esau. What these records show is that the modern slave trade flourished in the early Middle Ages as early as 869 AD, especially between Muslim traders and Western African kingdoms. Arabs owned slaves. Many Arabs owned slaves, Israelites, in East Africa. The death toll from 14 centuries of the Islamic slave trade in Africa is estimated at over 112 million. Always been Israelites. A great number of slaves that the Arab Muslims have put under captivity has always been Israelites. Because Israel still resides in Africa today, they are mistaken to be Africans and not the true direct descendants of Israel.
He said, "So it will be, thy Lord saith, it is easy for me, and it will be that we may make of
Arab slave trade. But let's get some solid facts first. Solid facts first. The slave market in Zanzibar sold an average of 300 slaves every day. In 700 AD, Zanzibar becomes the main Arab slave trading post in Africa. 1325 AD, Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, makes his pilgrimage to Mecca, carrying 500 slaves and 100 camels. Musa the Muslim. Musa was a devout Muslim, and his pilgrimage to Mecca, a command ordained by Allah according to core teaching of Islam, his procession reported to include 60,000 men, 12,000 slaves, who each carried 4 pounds of gold bars. 1444 AD, the first public sale of African slaves by Europeans takes place at Portugal. 1482 AD, Portugal founds the first European trading post in Africa. 1500 to 1600 AD, Portugal enjoys a virtual monopoly, meaning exclusive control, in the slave trade to the Americas. The Israelites in this, Isaiah chapter 42, verse 22. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 22. But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are, all of them, snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none says, Restore. Introduction. No European could hope to match. Introduction. The Arabs were the primary suppliers of the slaves, the wholesalers, if you will, for European-owned ships that made the Middle Passage. The Arabs had long established raiding and trading routes in Africa that no European could hope to match, so they continued to dominate the market. Islamic traders carried on a steady slave trade from East African ports for many centuries. African slaves began to appear in Italy, Spain, southern France, and Portugal well before the discovery of the New World in 1492. Arab-run slave trade also flourished, with much of this activity taking place in East Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean. General facts, 7-1. 7-1. General facts 7. Arab is not a racial group. Some Arabs are African and some are white and Jewish. Mizrahi, which includes Syrian, Iraqi, Persian, Kurdish, Egyptian, Moroccan, and Tunisian Jews. General facts 6 of 7. African internal slave trade is the oldest in the world, since some of the oldest civilizations, communities are in Africa. General facts 5 of 7. Taking more than 10 million Africans via the Swahili coast to India, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, also via the trans-Saharan across the Sahara route to North Africa and the Mediterranean, where enslaved markets such as Quetta, Morocco were located at. General facts 4 of 7. Africans were purchased to work as domestic service in Spain, Portugal, and other Western European countries. General facts 3 of 7. While Europeans targeted men in West Africa, the Arab trade primarily harvested the women of East Africa to serve as domestic slaves, wet nannies, and concubines. General facts 2 of 7. Western Europe not only corrupted the slave servility, submissiveness system in Africa, they also caused the Arab slave boom in the 19th century. General facts 1 of 7. As with all slaving regions in Africa, people captured locally during wars and raids were also enslaved by Somalis. Somali were, like Ethiopians, perceived as superior by the European and Arab slave traders to the region.
Assimilation.
Men who were enslaved would have gradually married non-African women. Assimilation. Some Afro-Arabs rose to great stations by virtue of their Arab fathers. This also added to disassociation with African culture due to the opportunities being Arab brought. Assimilation. So we see a diminishing of Africa and a rise of Arabia at the expense of African identity by the process of enslavement and cultural displacement. Assimilation. Men who were enslaved would have gradually married non-African women, hence facilitating the absorption of African culture into Arab lineage.
Equal! We buy them, feed them, clothe them, use them, discard them. Women equal to us?
Now Islam. Khazar Jews include even atheists in their definition, while Muslims do not. The most threatening force to Europe's domination was Islam. European powers have always tried to demonize Islam, even before the Crusades. Islam gave the Arabs a national identity, which allowed them to expand their geopolitical domination in a way previously impossible. Islam was a religion inseparable from trade relationships, and Africa and Arabia were old partners in trade.
I speak of the messenger of God. Muhammad teaches us.
Muhammad? Well, what is the goal? Muslims targeted African Jews and What is the goal? Muslims targeted African Jews and African Judeo-Christians for capture to sell to the Europeans for the transatlantic slaves trade. The majority of African Americans and Afro-Caribbeans are descendants of Hebrew mixed, and Judeo-Christian Hebrews who converted. Nehemiah chapter 13 verse 3. Now it came to pass, when they had heard the law, that they separated from Yasharael all the mixed multitude. Peoples from North, Northwest, West, Central, and East Africa, both Judaism and Christianity, were well established in Africa centuries prior to the arrival of Islam. Africans did not sell their own race. Africans, including Egyptians, are Hamitic. Compare and contrast. The women that went to the Muslims were used as concubines in harems, and the men were for military service. Compare and contrast. In contrast to the transatlantic slave trade, which had 2 Israelite men to every 1 woman, the Arab Muslim slave trade had 2 women Israelites to every 1 man. To add to this contrast, those Israelites that went to the Americas were used as farming and domestic labor, and the women that went to the Muslims were used as concubines in harems, and the men were for military service. It was noted that Israelite slaves were castrated, based on the assumption that the blacks had an ungovernable sexual appetite. It was very common for Muslim slave masters to have castrated their male slaves. Female slaves were required in considerable numbers for musicians, singers, and dancers. Many more were bought for domestic workers, and many were in demand as concubines. The harems of rulers could be enormous. The harem of Abdul Rahman III, 912 to 961 AD, in Cordoba contained over 6,000 concubines, and the one in the Fatimid Palace in Cairo had twice as many. Define. Harem, the part of a Muslim palace or house reserved for the residence of women. 2. The women in a Muslim household, including the mother, sister, wives, concubines, daughters, entertainers, and servants.
ሰዓት ነው ሌሊት የምነሳው 12 ሰዓት ላይ ነው ስራ የሚያልቀው እና የምሰራው ያው ብዙ ስራ ነው። ምግብ ማበስላለሁ፣ ቤትም አጸዳለሁ፣ ልጅም አለ ደግሞ ልጅም እጠብቃለሁ እና በቃ ሌላ ነገር ነው የሚፈልገው። ደሞዝ የማይሰጠኝም የነበረው ምክንያት ከኔ ጋር ሌላ ነገር ስለሚፈልግ ደሞዜን ከልክሎኝ ነበር። ያው ይመጣ ነበረ ማር ቤት ድረስ ይመጣ፣ ልጆቹ ይተኛሉ። ጠዋት ነው የሚነሳው እሱ ቀድሟቸው መተኛበት ድረስ ይመጣል። በቃ በመሰራበት ቦታ ይሄዳል፣ እየተከተለኝ ነው የሚሄደው። እሷ ስትነሳ ብቻ ነው የሚያቆመው። ስራ ጫና ታደርግብኝ ነበር፣ ትቆጣኝ ነበረ። እሱ ሲኖር ምንም ነገር አትለኝም፣ ትፈራዋለች። እሱ ሲወጣ ግን ስራ ታበዛብኛለች፣ ትቆጣኛለች። አዎ 5 ወር ሙሉ ጠባፍ ይሰጠኛል ብዬ ነበር፣ ደሞዜን አልሰጠኝም። ሰው እስካገኝ ነበር የሚያስጠፋኝ ሰው። በአጋጣሚ ልጆች ስልክ አግኝቼ ሰው ስልክ ሳገኝ
ለፈለጓቸው ስለሚያደርጉ የሚከራከርላቸው መንግስት ስለ እንደ ባሪያ አገዛዝ የድሮ ባሪያ አገዛዝ አለ አይደል? እንደዛ አድርገው ነው ያዙት።
ሰራ የነበረው ነው ከአምቤት አረቤት ነበር እና ባልና ሚስቶች ናቸው። 5 ልጆች አላቸው እና ቤቱ ስራ ይበዛብኛል እና ማለት ሴትዮዋ ማዳይ በጣም ትቀናለች። በጣም ነው የምትቀናው። ምግብ በጣም ተከለከለኝ ነበር። ልብስ አለባበስ ላይ በጣም ተጽዕኖ ታሳድርብኛለች። ልክ እንደዚሁ እንደለበስኩ ነው የምሰራው። ጸጉሬ ምን አይገለጽም። ሰውዬው ያስቸግረኛል። ሴትዮዋም ደግሞ በጣም ተቀናሽ፣ በጣም መጥፎ ነች። እነሱም በጣም መጥፎ ነው። ሁለቱም ብቻ ጥሩዎች አይደሉም እና ያስቸግረኛል። ጓደኛዬ ልጠፋበት የቻለችው አንድ ምክንያት ይሄ ነው። እሷንም ያስቸግራት ነበር እና ጓደኛዬ ማለት ነው ጓደኛዬ መታ አባራት በጨለማ ያ በጣም ትልቅ ማለት በጣም ትልቅ ትውስታ። ጓደኛዬና መታ አባራት በግምት ከሌሊቱ 2 ሰዓት አካባቢ ምናምን አባረረቻት እና ጓደኛዬ የትድረስ አላውቅም። ይሄ በጣም ትልቅ ትውስታዬ ነው።
The Israelites in this, Micah chapter 5 verse 8, and the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of sheep, who, if he go through, both treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. It's talking about us.
But today it's a different story. This is not an ambush. The lions are well fed and resting, using the scrub to shelter the cubs. In fact, it's they who've been taken by surprise. The cubs are too young to understand the danger. The buffalo sense their advantage, and defense switches to attack. The advance guards spot the cubs, and his fury is unleashed. 10 confused cubs try to hide, but for some it's too late. Lionesses try distracting the attackers, but they're outnumbered. When the cubs stop moving, the buffalo lose interest.